Hello everyone, I am the Midnight Storyteller. I know you clicked on this video to relax for a while or perhaps to let my voice help you fall asleep. Before you do, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you now? And what time is it? Alright, find a comfortable position and relax. It was just a small thing, easily overlooked. I found it on the sidewalk near my apartment building one afternoon. A little ceramic bird figurine, painted a soft, faded blue. It was simple, unassuming, maybe a child's toy or a decorative item that had fallen off a shelf. For some reason, I picked it up. It fit neatly in the palm of my hand, smooth and cool to the touch. I wasn't sure why, but I decided to bring it inside. I placed it on a bookshelf in my living room, thinking it looked kind of cute, a little splash of color among the books. For a few days it was just there, an inert ceramic bird on a shelf. Then as I was tidying up, I decided it didn't really fit my decor after all. It seemed a little kitschy. No problem, I thought. Easy enough to get rid of. I picked it up, walked to the kitchen, and tossed it into the trash can beneath the sink. Out of sight, out of mind. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen to make coffee and saw it sitting on the counter right next to the coffee maker. The little blue ceramic bird. I stared at it confused. How? I distinctly remembered throwing it away. Had it somehow fallen out? Had I, in a moment of distraction, picked it out of the trash again, without realizing? It seemed unlikely, but I was still half asleep. I shrugged it off as a bizarre oversight. I picked it up again, walked back to the trash can, lifted the lid and dropped it in, making sure it landed among the coffee grounds and discarded packaging. I then tied the trash bag securely and took it outside to the large communal dumpster in the alley behind my building. I lifted the heavy lid and tossed the bag inside. There, definitely gone this time. The next afternoon, I came home from work, tired and ready to relax. As I reached my front door, I noticed something on the doormat. The little blue ceramic bird. My blood ran cold. How was this possible? The dumpster was secured. The trash bag was tied. It wasn't possible for it to just show up back on my doormat. A prickle of unease ran up my spine. Was someone playing a prank on me? Did one of my neighbors see me throw it away and think it would be funny to return it? It seemed like an awful lot of effort for a joke. I picked it up hesitantly this time. It felt heavy, solid, completely unremarkable. But its presence here, after I had made sure it was gone, felt deeply wrong. I brought it inside, but I didn't put it back on the shelf. I didn't know what to do with it. Over the next few days, the reappearances escalated in their impossibility. I tried throwing it in a public trash can miles from my apartment. It was back on my kitchen counter the next morning. I tried breaking it. I took a hammer and smashed the little bird on a concrete slab in my basement. The ceramic seemed unnaturally hard, resisting the blows more than I expected, but it eventually shattered into several pieces. I gathered every shard, every tiny chip, put them in a sealed plastic container, then put that container inside a locked metal box. Then double-bagged the box and threw it in a dumpster in a different town. While I was on a weekend trip, I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. There it was gone, reduced to fragments, locked away, miles away. But when I returned from my trip, tired but relieved, I walked into my living room and saw it, sitting on my coffee table, perfectly intact. The little blue ceramic bird. Not a scratch, not a chip. It looked exactly as it had when I first found it. Pure terror seized me. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't coincidence. This was impossible. The object was defying physical reality, refusing to be discarded. It wanted to be here, or something wanted it to be here. My home, my sanctuary, no longer felt safe. The object's presence felt like an intrusion, a violation. It sat there silently, its painted eyes seemingly watching me, a constant terrifying reminder that I was not in control, that something inexplicable was happening right here in my living room. I tried burying it. I drove out to a remote spot in the woods, dug a deep hole, placed the figurine in a small locked wooden box, put the box in the hole, and covered it with earth, packing it down firmly. As I was driving away, I felt a fleeting sense of peace, a hope that the earth itself might hold on to it. That night I slept fitfully. The image of the little blue bird burned into my eyelids. I woke up in the middle of the night feeling a strange pressure on my chest. I opened my eyes and my breath hitched. The room was dark, but I could see it. The little blue ceramic bird figurine, sitting on my chest, right on top of the blanket. It was cold against my skin, and it felt heavy, impossibly heavy for its size. It was also slightly damp, and smelled faintly of fresh soil. It had come back. Again, directly into my bed while I was sleeping. This wasn't just reappearing. It was violating my personal space, asserting its presence in the most terrifying way possible. I scrambled out of bed, throwing the figurine onto the floor. It landed with a dull thud. I stood there trembling, staring at the innocuous-looking object on the carpet. I couldn't destroy it. I couldn't discard it. It simply refused to leave. The attempt to get rid of it stopped that night. I realized it was futile, and perhaps even dangerous. Each attempt only seemed to reinforce its persistence, to bring it back in more unsettling ways. I was trapped in my own home with an object that refused to leave, a silent, unblinking witness to my terror. I picked up the figurine, my hand shaking. I couldn't bring myself to touch it for long. It felt colder now, always. Even in a warm room, I decided to put it somewhere visible, somewhere I could always see it, where its reappearance wouldn't be a shock, just a constant, low-grade horror. I placed it on the highest shelf in the living room, in the center where its blue form stood out clearly against the wall. It sits there now, a permanent resident, a silent sentinel. Its presence permeates the air in the room, a constant source of unease. I try not to look at it directly, but my eyes are always drawn to its unchanging form, its painted, unblinking eyes. The fear of it is always there, the knowledge that I cannot discard it, that my home is not entirely my own, that this small, mundane object holds some inexplicable power over my life. I haven't tried to throw away anything significant since this started. The thought of discarding something, anything, fills me with dread. What if it comes back? What if that object also refuses to leave? The little blue ceramic bird is a daily reminder of the impossible. It sits there, silent and still, but its presence speaks volumes. It tells me that some boundaries are not as solid as we believe, that some things, once they enter your world, decide to stay, no matter how much you want them gone. It is my silent, terrifying roommate, a permanent fixture in my life, a constant, chilling testament to the object that simply refused to leave. And I live with the terrifying knowledge that it's always there, watching, waiting, a silent, unblinking reminder that I am no longer truly alone in my own home. My bedroom had always been my sanctuary, a place of quiet, rest, and privacy. It was just a normal room in a normal apartment, 4 walls, a ceiling, a floor, a window overlooking a quiet street. Nothing remarkable about it, which is why when the sounds started, I was so quick to dismiss them. It began as a faint, almost imperceptible murmur. I'd be lying in bed at night, reading or just winding down, and I'd hear it, a low, indistinct sound, like distant voices, just barely audible. I initially thought it was my neighbors. Their apartment was next door, separated by a shared wall. Maybe their TV was on low, or they were talking quietly. It was annoying, but understandable. I'd try to ignore it, or put on some quiet music to drown it out. But the murmurs were persistent, and they seemed to come not just from the shared wall, but from the other walls too. From the wall opposite the bed, from the wall by the door. It wasn't loud enough to make out words. Just a low, constant undertone, like a conversation happening just on the edge of hearing. It was like the sound of wind rustling through leaves, but coming from within the solid structure of the room. I started to pay closer attention. I'd turn off all the electronics, stop everything, and listen intently. And when I did, the sounds would fade completely. The room would become utterly silent, save for the hum of my refrigerator outside in the kitchen, or the distant sounds of the street. But the moment I stopped actively straining my ears, the moment I relaxed or turned away, the low murmur would return, a subtle, persistent presence in the quiet. This inconsistency was deeply unsettling. It felt like the sounds were reacting to my attention, like they didn't want to be heard, not fully, not directly. They were there, undeniable, but they retreated whenever I tried to confirm their existence. I began to suspect they weren't coming from outside the walls, but from within them. I pressed my ear against the wall next to my bed, holding my breath, listening. I could hear the faint sounds of the house settling, the distant plumbing, my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. But the murmur wasn't there, not when my ear was pressed directly against the surface. Yet when I pulled back an inch, I could hear it again, diffused, surrounding me. My anxiety levels began to rise. The bedroom, my sanctuary, felt invaded. These weren't just house noises. They felt like something else, something active, deliberate. The low murmur was constant when I was in the room, especially alone and in quiet. It was like the room itself was sighing, or breathing, filled with this strange soft sound that only I seemed able to perceive. I tried to get confirmation. I asked a friend to stay over, had them sit in my bedroom in the quiet. "Do you hear that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. That low sound, like talking. They listened intently, tilting their heads. "No," they said, looking puzzled. "I don't hear anything but the fridge." I tried again, more desperately. "It's coming from the walls. Can't you hear it?" They listened again, then looked at me with concern. "Honestly, no. Are you sure you're getting enough sleep?" Their inability to hear it sent a cold dread through me. Was I hallucinating? Was this the beginning of a psychological break? The self-doubt was agonizing, a constant battle against the undeniable reality of the sounds I was hearing. But the sounds felt real. They felt external. They had a quality to them that didn't feel like something conjured from within my own head. The whispers, for that's what they increasingly felt like, became more distinct, though still maddeningly unintelligible. Sometimes, the murmur seemed to rise and fall in intensity, like a conversation with fluctuating emotion. Sometimes, there were sharp, quick sounds woven into the murmur, like fingers tapping against wood, or a faint, dry rustling. It felt like there was something inside the walls, or perhaps the walls were just a thin barrier, and something was on the other side, pressing against it, trying to make itself heard. My fear of the bedroom grew. I'd spend as little time there as possible, avoiding it during the day, delaying going to bed at night. When I was in the room, I needed constant noise, music, podcasts, anything loud enough to drown out the whispers. But even then, I sometimes felt them pressing through the sound, a subtle vibration in the air, a sense that they were still there, just waiting for the noise to stop. The whispers felt like they were trying to tell me something, to lure me, or maybe just to torment me. They were never clear enough to understand, but their mere presence was a constant source of anxiety. The room felt aware. Somehow its walls no longer just inanimate structures, but filled with a hidden murmuring life. The psychological toll was immense. Sleep deprivation, paranoia, the constant questioning of my own sanity. It all built up, creating a suffocating sense of dread. I felt trapped by the sounds, unable to escape them in the place where I was supposed to feel safest. The climax came one particularly quiet night. The house was silent, the street outside still. I was in bed trying to read, trying to ignore the familiar murmur that had already started. But tonight it was different. The murmur was louder, more insistent, and it wasn't just a diffuse sound. It felt like it was coming from a specific spot in the wall, the shared wall with the next apartment, near the corner of the room. I put my book down, My heart pounding, I listened, not trying to make it stop this time, just listening. The murmur from that spot intensified, and then, horrifyingly, syllables began to emerge from the sound, coalescing into a distinct word. It said my name, whispered from within the wall, clear and undeniable. It was a dry, sibilant sound, like paper rubbing against paper, or something ancient trying to speak through dust. Hearing my name spoken by that disembodied sound from within the wall shattered my last remaining defenses. It wasn't hallucination, it was real, and it knew who I was. As I stared at the wall, paralyzed by terror, the whisper grew louder, more urgent. It wasn't just my name anymore. It was a string of other sounds, distorted, overlapping, but carrying a clear sense of distress, or perhaps a desperate plea. The wall itself seemed to feel different now, driven by a mix of terror and a desperate need to understand. I reached out and touched the spot where the sounds were coming from. The wall felt unnaturally cold beneath my fingertips, and as I touched it, I felt a faint but undeniable vibration, a tremor running through the plaster and drywall, synchronized with the intensified whispers emanating from within. It felt like something was stirring behind the wall, responding to my touch, trying to push through. The whispers swelled into a chaotic chorus, not just from that spot, but from all the walls at once, a terrifying symphony of overlapping, unintelligible sounds that filled the room, pressing in on me, overwhelming my senses. Panic, pure and absolute, broke my paralysis. I scrambled out of bed, away from the walls, away from the sounds. The room felt like it was shrinking, the walls closing in, filled with this terrifying, invisible life. I fumbled for the door, my hands shaking, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I burst out of the bedroom and into the hallway, slamming the door shut behind me. The moment the door closed, the sound stopped. Abruptly, the apartment outside the bedroom was silent, normal. I leaned against the hallway wall, trembling, gasping for air. My body slick with cold sweat. I couldn't go back into that room. Not that night. Not ever again. I slept on the sofa in the living room. Lights on, music playing, desperate to avoid the silence, desperate to avoid hearing those whispers again. Since that night, I've avoided the bedroom entirely. It remains empty. The door kept closed, but the fear hasn't stayed confined to that room. I still hear sounds in the quiet, not always the clear whispers from the wall, but faint murmurs, scraping sounds, just at the edge of hearing, seeming to come from within the walls of other rooms, or even from within my own head. The experience broke my relationship with silence, with walls, with my own home. I don't know what was in the walls or where the sounds came from, or why they spoke my name, but I know they were real, and they heard me and they knew who I was. And now, even in the relative safety of other rooms, I can't shake the feeling that the walls around me are listening, that they are just thin barriers, and that sometimes, if the world outside gets quiet enough, I might hear those whispers again. A chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying things aren't outside your home. They're hidden inside the very structure you thought was protecting you. And they're talking about you. Living in the city means navigating its labyrinthine streets, finding the quickest way from point A to point B. Sometimes, you discover a shortcut, a passage that shaves off precious minutes from your commute. That's how I found the alley. It was a narrow space between two older buildings, connecting two parallel streets in the downtown core. From the outside, it looked like any other urban alleyway, brick walls covered in peeling paint and graffiti, overflowing dumpsters, metal fire escapes zigzagging upwards, the air thick with the smell of exhaust and refuse. Grimy, uninviting, but potentially practical. I first used it one afternoon when I was running late for a meeting. It was daylight, the sun high, making the alley seem less intimidating. I ducked into it, expecting a quick, unpleasant dash through the urban grime. It was indeed unpleasant, smells, dripping pipes, the occasional scuttling rat, but I emerged onto the next street exactly where I expected to be, and it had indeed saved me a few minutes. A useful, if unpleasant, shortcut. Over the next week, I used it a few more times when I was in a hurry, and that's when I started noticing things that were off. The second time I took the alley, it felt different, shorter. Somehow, I emerged onto the street feeling like I had traversed the space much faster than its apparent length should have allowed. As I glanced back into the alley from the street, the walls seemed to shift slightly in my peripheral vision, the angles looking momentarily wrong, before snapping back to normal. The third time, the lighting felt strange, even though it was a clear day. Patches of the alley were unnaturally dark, as if under perpetual shadow, while other areas were strangely illuminated, almost glowing. I heard a sound that didn't belong, a faint tinny music, like from an old music box, echoing from somewhere above me, though I couldn't see any source. By the fourth time, a prickle of unease had replaced my simple desire for a shortcut. The alley seemed longer that trip, the walls stretching out endlessly before me. The graffiti was different too, not the usual tags, but strange symbols I didn't recognize, looping and intertwined, covering sections of the brickwork. They looked ancient and disturbing. My rational mind fought to explain it. Different angles of the sun, my own perception skewed by being in a hurry. The city is full of weird nooks and crannies, but the inconsistencies, the way the alley seemed to subtly change with each passage, felt deliberate, unnatural. Morbid curiosity began to wrestle with my growing fear. What was this alley? Why was it different every time? I started taking the alley even when I wasn't in a rush, driven by a desperate need to understand. I'd enter cautiously, phone flashlight in hand, even in daylight, trying to note details, to look for a pattern. But there was no pattern. Each trip was a unique, unsettling experience. One time, the walls felt strangely soft to the touch, almost yielding. Another time, the air felt heavy, thick with an cloying, sweet smell. I saw doorways that weren't there before, cut into the solid brick, leading only to impenetrable blackness. I saw windows high up that showed impossible views, not the buildings opposite, but swirling colors or distorted landscapes. I started encountering things, not people, figures, static and unsettling. A tall, impossibly thin shape standing perfectly still beside a dumpster, facing the wall, its form too sharp, too angular to be human. A cluster of small hunched shapes huddled in a recess like discarded bundles of rags, but radiating an intense cold. They never moved when I looked directly at them, but I felt they were aware of me, silent observers in the shifting space. The psychological toll was immense. The alley became an obsession, a source of both terror and fascination. The mundane world outside felt less real, less solid, knowing that just a few feet away, between two normal buildings, lay a space that defied reality. I felt disoriented even when I wasn't in the alley, questioning distances, lights and sounds. The fear of what I might see this time was crippling, but the pull to step into the unpredictable space, to see its latest manifestation, was incredibly strong. It felt like the alley was showing me glimpses of something else. My attempts to document it failed. Photos taken inside the alley came out blurred or distorted, showing nothing of the impossible sights I witnessed. Trying to measure the length of the alley yielded inconsistent results, the space seeming to expand or contract depending on the passage. The climax of my experiences came on a cold, gray afternoon. I had planned to avoid the alley, taking the long way around, but a sudden downpour caught me without an umbrella, and the quickest shelter seemed to be the street on the other side of the buildings. Against my better judgment, fear warring with desperation to get out of the rain, I ducked into the alley. It was instantly darker than it should have been, despite the time of day. The usual grime felt heavier, almost viscous underfoot. The air was unnaturally still and silent, the sound of the rain outside completely cut off, and the alley walls, they were no longer brick, They were a smooth, black, glistening material that seemed to subtly ripple, like disturbed water. As I hurried through the impossible space, the alley seemed to stretch out endlessly before me, the exit light in the distance receding. As I walked, the geometry felt wrong, the walls not parallel, but angled in a way that distorted perspective. I heard sounds that were amplified, echoing strangely, my own frantic breathing, the squelch of my shoes on the unseen ground, and something else, a low, chittering sound that seemed to come from all directions at once. Panic clawed at my throat. I tried to run faster, but the air felt thick, resistant, like running through mud. As I struggled forward, the rippling black walls seemed to pulse, and faint, glowing symbols, like the ones I'd seen before but brighter now, appeared and disappeared on their surface. Then, from a recess that hadn't been there before, a shape emerged. It wasn't static like the others I had seen. It was tall and impossibly thin, its form a silhouette against the unnatural darkness, but it moved with a jerky, unnatural speed, scuttling along the rippling wall towards me. It emitted a sound, that same chittering, but louder now, closer, filled with a horrifying hunger. Pure, animalistic terror overwhelmed me. It was real, it was a threat. I stumbled, turned, and ran blindly in the opposite direction, not knowing if I was heading towards the other entrance or deeper into the impossible space. The alley seemed to twist behind me, the rippling walls converging, the chittering sound echoing, seeming to surround me. I felt like I was trapped in a closing throat. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, I saw a patch of brighter light ahead. I threw myself towards it, bursting out of the alley with a gasp, slamming face first into a solid object. I scrambled away, heart hammering, gasping for air, expecting to see the rippling walls or the chittering shape right behind me. I had collided with a dumpster. I was back on the familiar street. The air smelled of exhaust and rain, normal city smells. People with umbrellas were walking by, looking at me strangely. The building next to me was made of normal brick. The alley entrance was just a dark gap between two buildings, silent and unremarkable. I never took that alley again. I can't even walk past its entrances without feeling a wave of nausea and fear. The sight of a narrow urban passage fills me with dread. The experience fundamentally altered my perception of the city. It showed me that reality isn't fixed, that familiar spaces can hide impossible dimensions, and that sometimes a shortcut isn't just a path. It's a threshold. The alley is still there, between those two buildings. It looks normal from the street, but I know what it can become. I know it's a place where physics bends and nightmares manifest, and I live with the chilling fear that one day, when the light is wrong, or the city is quiet, I might glance down that narrow gap and see, just for a second, those rippling black walls, or hear that faint, impossible chittering sound, calling me back into the shifting, terrifying space between worlds. I've always had a soft spot for old technology. There's something fascinating about the clunky hardware, the outdated operating systems, the digital ghosts of the past. So, when I saw an old desktop computer tower and its bulky CRT monitor at a garage sale for next to nothing, I couldn't resist. It was a relic from the late 90s or early 2000s, yellowed plastic, chunky keyboard and mouse. I figured it might be fun to tinker with, see what old files were on it, maybe play some vintage games. Getting it set up in my spare room was a trip down memory lane. The whirring of the fan, the clicking of the hard drive, the low hum of the CRT monitor. As it powered on, it ran an old version of Windows, clunky and familiar. I spent the first few days exploring the dusty hard drive, finding old documents, long forgotten software, and some shareware games from decades ago. It was mostly harmless digital archaeology. Deep within the labyrinthine folders, I found a file simply labeled Game. XA. It wasn't in any recognizable game directory, just tucked away in a random utility folder. Curiosity piqued. I double-clicked it. The screen went black for a moment, then a simple window opened. It was a program with extremely basic graphics, maybe 16 or 20. It looked like a text-based adventure or a very early point-and-click game. The initial screen had no title, just a few lines of simple pixelated text and a cursor blinking. It seemed functional, if primitive. I played it for a few minutes, clicking on abstract shapes, typing simple commands, but it didn't seem to go anywhere. Just looped through strange, nonsensical phrases and static images. Maybe it was a student project or incomplete software. It was weird but harmless. I closed the window, shut down the computer, and left it for the night. The next evening I was in the living room, reading. The spare room where the computer was located was dark and silent. Suddenly I heard a series of distinct sounds coming from that room. The whirring of the computer fan, the click and whir of the hard drive spinning up, the low hum as the monitor activated. My heart leaped. The computer was off. More importantly, it was unplugged from the wall. I had unplugged it the previous night after shutting it down, just out of habit. I got up, trembling slightly, and went to the spare room. The CRT monitor was glowing with a faint bluish light in the darkness. On the screen was the window for game. X's open and running, displaying the same initial screen I had seen. But how? It was unplugged. I stared at the power cable lying inert on the floor. I looked at the back of the computer tower. Definitely unplugged. A wave of cold dread washed over me. This wasn't a power surge. This wasn't a malfunction. This was impossible. Hesitantly, I approached the desk. The hum from the monitor felt louder now, charged with an unnatural energy. I reached out and touched the computer tower. It felt cool, normal. I touched the monitor, warm as expected. From being on, I pressed the power button on the tower. Nothing happened. It was already on, somehow without power. I reached behind the monitor and flicked its own power switch off. The screen went black. The hum stopped. Silence returned to the room, but the next day it happened again. And the day after that, the computer would activate on its own. Sometimes in the middle of the night, waking me with the sounds of its boot up. Sometimes during the day when I was in another room. Each time it was unplugged. And each time, game X would be running on the screen. The content displayed by the program began to change. It was no longer just abstract shapes and nonsensical phrases. Text messages would appear, scrolling across the screen, sometimes appearing word by word. They were often fragmented, disturbing. Phrases like, "He sees you," or "empty rooms," or "listen closer," and sometimes chillingly my own name would appear. Pixelated and stark. The graphics became more unsettling too. Crude, pixelated figures would appear, stick figures with distorted limbs, or blocky shapes that seemed to twist and contort on the screen. They felt malevolent, watching. I tried everything to stop it. I plugged the computer back in and tried to delete the .exe file. The computer would freeze, or the file would immediately reappear after deletion. I tried running antivirus software, outdated, but still, it found nothing. I tried booting into safe mode, running command prompts trying to force delete the file. It was impossible. The file seemed protected by something beyond the operating system. I decided to try a more drastic approach. I opened up the computer tower. Dust spilled out, the smell of old electronics filling the air. I located the hard drive, the source of the file. I unplugged the power cable leading to it. The data cable too. Logically, there was no way the computer could access the program now, or even boot fully. I put the side panel back on. That night I was woken by the familiar sounds of the computer booting up. My heart sank. I went to the spare room. The monitor was on, displaying the program. It was even more impossible now. The hard drive was physically disconnected. My fear escalated into genuine terror and paranoia. This wasn't just a malfunctioning computer. It felt like something was inhabiting it. Something that could bypass physical laws, something that was aware of me. In my home, communicating with me through this obsolete machine. I felt watched constantly, not just by the computer itself, but by whatever entity was using it. Was it looking out through the screen? Was it learning about me from the files on the hard drive? The messages on the screen became more personal, more threatening. They referenced things in my apartment, things I had done. "You left the door open," appeared one night, after I had forgotten to lock it. "You are afraid," flashed repeatedly across the screen when I was particularly anxious. The crude figures on screen sometimes seemed to mimic my movements, or point towards other parts of my apartment. The climax of the horror came one evening. The computer activated its sounds louder, harsher than before. I went to the room, already trembling. On the screen, the program had changed entirely. There were no abstract shapes or text prompts. The entire screen was filled with pixelated video feed. It was grainy, distorted, but undeniably a view of my own living room. The perspective was impossible, as if the camera was floating near the ceiling, looking down, and the room on screen was empty. As I watched, horrified, a text message scrolled across the bottom. "Look behind you." My blood ran cold. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stood in the doorway of the spare room, staring at the monitor displaying an impossible view of my living room. Being told to look behind me. Was there something in the living room right now? Was the computer seeing it? Or was it trying to lure me? Then the image on the screen flickered violently, replaced by static, then a horrifying image, the crude pixelated figure from before, but filling the screen, its distorted face looming, its eyes dark voids, and from the computer speakers, which normally only emitted system beeps, came a sound, a low, wet, cackling laugh, that filled the room, emanating from the machine. The laugh was the breaking point. It was malicious, triumphant, utterly non-human. It felt like the entity was reveling in my terror, revealing its presence in the most direct, terrifying way. I backed away from the room, stumbling, my mind reeling from the impossible video feed, the terrifying image, the horrifying laugh. I couldn't stay near it. I couldn't let it continue. Driven by a desperate primal need to silence it, to destroy it, I ran to the garage. I grabbed the heaviest tool I could find, a sledgehammer. My body was trembling, slick with cold sweat, but a white-hot rage mixed with terror propelled me. I returned to the spare room. The computer was still on, the monitor displaying that terrifying pixelated figure, the cackling laugh still echoing from the speakers. I didn't hesitate. I raised the sledgehammer and brought it down with all my might onto the CRT monitor. Glass shattered. The screen went black with a final dying screech from the speakers. I hit the tower, again and again, smashing the case, destroying the hard drive, the circuit boards, reducing the machine to mangled metal and plastic. I kept hitting until there was nothing left but broken pieces and silence. The cackling laugh was gone. The terrifying image was gone. The silent, impossible activity was gone. That was months ago. The remains of the computer are in pieces in my garage, or gone to the scrap heap. But the experience left a permanent mark. I can't look at old electronics the same way. I get a jolt of fear seeing outdated hardware. I'm paranoid about my own computer and phone, checking permissions, covering webcams, convinced that something could still be watching, learning. The memory of that impossible video feed of my living room, the terrifying pixelated figure, and that raw, cackling laugh are burned into my mind. I still sometimes see flickering lights out of the corner of my eye, or static on a dark screen, and for a second my heart leaps, terrified it's starting again. I don't know what was in that computer. What force was using it? Was it some form of digital entity? A ghost? Something else entirely? I have no answers. All I know is that a piece of old technology became a gateway to a private hell, showing me things that shouldn't be possible, invading my home and my mind. And even though I destroyed the hardware, the chilling fear remains. The fear that whatever was on that screen, whatever was laughing, might not have been entirely contained within the machine, and that it might still be out there, somewhere, perhaps looking for another screen to call home, another way to reach me. Dreams are usually fleeting things, fragments of the subconscious that dissolve like smoke upon waking. You might remember a feeling, a hazy image, but the details are lost. The experience safely confined to the realm of sleep. Mine stopped being like that. My dreams became solid, persistent, and they refused to stay where they belonged. It started a few months ago, seemingly out of nowhere. I began having a recurring nightmare. It was always the same place, a house, but wrong. Not structurally, at least not obviously, but atmospherically. It was perpetually dim, the air heavy and cold, filled with the scent of dust, and something else I couldn't quite place, something metallic and damp. The rooms were sparsely furnished, draped in pale, faded sheets, and there was always a presence, a figure. I never saw it clearly. It was always in the periphery, a tall, slender shape that seemed to absorb the light around it, making the shadows deeper, more solid. It moved with an unnerving silence, gliding rather than walking, always just out of sight when I tried to turn and face it. The nightmare wasn't always the same scenario. Sometimes I was exploring the decaying house, trying to find an exit. Sometimes I was trapped in one specific room, its windows boarded up, the figure waiting outside the door. Sometimes I was just standing in the oppressive silence, knowing it was near. But the house and the figure were constants, and the feeling was always the same: profound dread, absolute helplessness, and the chilling certainty that the figure was aware of me, watching me, waiting. Waking up from this nightmare was always jarring. My heart would be pounding, my body drenched in cold sweat. The feeling of dread from the dream wouldn't vanish immediately. It would linger for hours, a heavy weight on my chest, a tightness in my throat. I'd try to shake it off, tell myself it was just a bad dream, maybe caused by stress or something I ate. But the consistency, the vividness of it, night after night, was more than just a bad dream. Then elements from the nightmare began to seep into my waking life. The first thing I noticed were the sounds. When I was alone in my apartment, and it was particularly quiet, I would sometimes hear sounds that belonged only to the dream house. The distinct creak of a floorboard that sounded exactly like the one in the dream's hallway. A low guttural murmur, like the muffled sounds I sometimes heard from the dream figure. A rhythmic dripping sound, as if from a leaking pipe in the dream basement. These sounds weren't loud, but they were undeniably there, emanating from the seemingly solid walls or air of my otherwise normal apartment. And just like in the dream, they would often fade or stop if I actively tried to listen, adding another layer to the maddening uncertainty. Next came the visuals. Out of the corner of my eye I would catch fleeting distortions. Shadows that seemed too deep, too solid, momentarily taking on the outline of the dream figure, before resolving back into normal darkness. A corner of a room seeming to stretch or warp for an instant, resembling the impossible angles of the dream house. These were quick, gone before I could focus, easily dismissed as tiredness or peripheral vision playing tricks. But I knew what I had seen. The feeling of dread, too, became more persistent. It wasn't just something that lingered after waking. It would appear randomly during the day, a sudden wave of intense fear or panic that had no root in my current reality. It felt like the emotions from the dream were somehow breaking through, manifesting in my waking state. My life became a desperate balancing act between the world I knew and the dream world that seemed to be encroaching upon it. Sleep was terrifying. I dreaded going to bed, knowing the nightmare was waiting. But staying awake led to exhaustion, which seemed to make the waking intrusions worse, blurring the lines between the two states. I was trapped in a cycle of fear and sleep deprivation. I started journaling the dreams obsessively, trying to find a pattern, a meaning, anything that could explain why this was happening. I researched nightmares, sleep paralysis, lucid dreaming, hoping to find a way to control the dream, or make it stop. I talked to friends vaguely about vivid nightmares, but couldn't bring myself to describe the waking intrusions. The fear of sounding insane was immense, almost as great as the fear of the dream itself. The psychological toll was severe. I struggled to concentrate, felt constantly on edge, and began to question my own sanity. Was I actually hearing and seeing these things, or was the nightmare infecting my waking mind, causing me to hallucinate? The boundary between sleep and reality felt thin, permeable, threatening to dissolve completely. The climax came one night, when the nightmare was particularly vivid, particularly terrifying. In the dream, I was in that familiar decaying house. The figure was closer than ever before, silent, looming in the oppressive darkness. The sense of dread was overwhelming. I could feel its presence, cold and heavy, just behind me. And then, I woke up. But I wasn't in my bedroom. Or, I was in my bedroom, but it felt wrong. The air was heavy and cold, exactly like the dream house. The room was shrouded in a dim, unnatural darkness, even though the curtains were thin. And the silence, it wasn't silent. I could hear them, the distinct creak of the dream floorboard, the low, guttural murmur, the rhythmic dripping, sounds that belonged only to the nightmare. Now filling my bedroom, my heart was hammering, my body rigid with terror. I could feel the oppressive atmosphere of the dream pressing in on me, suffocating me. My eyes darted around the room, seeing shadows that seemed too deep, too solid, shifting in the gloom. And in the corner, just out of my direct line of sight, I saw it, a shape tall and slender, darker than the darkness, perfectly still. The figure from the nightmare. It was here, in my room, in my waking world. A wave of absolute, paralyzing terror washed over me. I was caught between the dream and reality, experiencing the nightmare as if it were physically present. The feeling of being watched was intense, palpable, radiating from the corner where the shape stood. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen, trapped in the terrifying reality of the nightmare's intrusion. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, but its presence was overwhelming, radiating a palpable malice and dread. The sounds of the dream house continued around me, amplifying the horror. Was I still dreaming? Was this sleep paralysis? Or had the nightmare finally found a way to break through, to manifest in my world? I don't know how long I lay there, paralyzed, experiencing the nightmare as reality. Eventually, slowly, the sounds began to fade. The oppressive atmosphere lightened. The shape in the corner seemed to dissipate, resolving back into normal shadows. The coldness receded. When the room finally felt like my bedroom again, bathed in the gray light of dawn, I was trembling uncontrollably, slick with cold sweat, exhausted but wired. I managed to scramble out of bed, turn on every light in the apartment, desperate to push back the darkness, to push back the dream. That experience shattered the boundary completely. I can no longer be certain what is real and what is not. The nightmare didn't just linger, it walked into my room. I now live in a state of perpetual exhaustion and fear of sleep. I avoid quiet spaces, needing constant noise to feel grounded. I still sometimes hear the sounds from the dream, or see the fleeting shapes in my periphery. The memory of that night, of seeing the figure in my own bedroom, is a constant source of terror. I don't know if the dream was just a dream, and I had a terrifying hallucination, or if the nightmare is a real place, and the barrier between it and my reality is slowly eroding. All I know is that the nightmare didn't stay confined to my sleep. It touched my world, and I live with the terrifying knowledge that it is always there, just waiting for me to close my eyes, or for reality to thin just enough to step back in. And I don't know if I'll survive the next time the dream decides to linger. There's a specific corner in my living room. It's just a normal corner, where two walls meet, near a large window and my favorite armchair. Nothing remarkable about it. It's well lit during the day, a comfortable spot to sit and read. But for the past few months, that corner, and specifically the armchair within it, has become a source of profound, inexplicable dread. It started subtly. I was sitting in the armchair one evening, scrolling on my phone. I felt a sudden heaviness on my shoulders, a pressure that made me slump slightly. I shifted, thinking I had just been sitting in a bad posture or was tired. The feeling lingered for a moment, then dissipated. I didn't think much of it. Just a crick in the neck, maybe, but the feeling returned the next time I sat in that chair. A distinct pressure on my shoulders and upper back, like something heavy was resting there. It wasn't painful, just present, uncomfortable. I tried adjusting the chair, fluffing the cushions, but the feeling persisted whenever I was settled in that specific seat. Soon, I noticed it wasn't just the chair. If I stood in that specific corner of the living room, even without being in the armchair, I would feel it, a heaviness in the air around me, a subtle resistance, like standing underwater, or like something was gently pressing down on the space I occupied. The feeling was localized to that corner. If I stepped a foot away, it vanished. Step back in, it returned. This escalated from a minor discomfort to something genuinely unsettling. It felt like a physical presence, unseen but tangible through the pressure it exerted. It wasn't just my body feeling heavy, it felt like the space itself was heavy, or that something invisible was pressing down on that specific area. The feeling wasn't constant, it came and went, but it was most noticeable when the room was quiet, and I was still. My initial rationalizations crumbled quickly. It wasn't posture, it wasn't fatigue. I had a doctor check me out. No physical issues with my back or shoulders, no circulation problems. I checked the house structure. No signs of sagging ceiling, no heavy objects stored directly above. I even bought a barometric pressure reader. The air pressure in that corner was no different from the rest of the room. There was no physical explainable reason for this sensation. The fear began to settle in. What was this unseen weight? Was it some strange localized atmospheric phenomenon? Or something else? Something non-physical? The pressure started intensifying. It wasn't just on my shoulders. It felt like a weight on my chest, making it slightly harder to breathe. It felt like invisible hands pressing down, holding me in that spot. I started avoiding the armchair in the corner, but the feeling of being drawn to it remained. I'd find myself standing near the edge of the affected area, peering into it, a mix of fear and morbid curiosity pulling at me. The living room started to feel different, tainted by the presence of that heavy corner. It was a constant low-grade source of anxiety. Sometimes the weight seemed to be accompanied by other subtle sensations in that corner. A faint, unidentifiable smell, like cold, damp stone. A subtle static electricity in the air that made the hairs on my arms stand up. A fleeting sense of being watched from within the heavy air itself. These added to the growing dread, confirming that this was more than just a bizarre physical anomaly. The psychological toll was immense. I felt paranoid, trapped. Was this weight just localized? Or was it trying to expand? Was it tied to the house? Or to me when I was in that spot? The thought of something invisible exerting physical force was deeply terrifying. It defied everything I understood about the world. I tried leaving the house for a few days, hoping distance would break whatever connection existed. When I returned, the feeling in the corner was initially less intense, but it was still there, waiting. It felt like it was a part of the house now, an invisible occupant of that specific space. The weight continued to wax and wane, sometimes barely noticeable, sometimes a distinct pressure, but the fear of it returning with full force was constant. I knew deep down that the only way to confront this was to experience its peak intensity, to see what it could truly do. Or maybe I just couldn't avoid it forever. The climax came one evening when I was alone in the living room. I wasn't in the armchair but standing near the edge of the corner, compelled by that familiar unsettling pull. The air in the corner felt heavier than ever before, thick and resistant. My breath felt shallower, and then the pressure intensified dramatically. It wasn't gradual this time. It slammed down on me like an invisible force, a crushing weight on my shoulders and chest, pushing me downwards. My knees buckled, and I fell to the floor, half in, half out of the affected corner. The pressure was immense, pinning me to the ground. It felt like something vast and unseen was pressing its entire weight down on me, trying to flatten me into the floorboards. I struggled against it, trying to push myself up to crawl away, but I couldn't move. My muscles strained, but the weight was too great. It was terrifyingly physical, a tangible force without a visible source. The air around me in the corner felt incredibly dense, suffocating. The cold, damp smell intensified, filling my lungs. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, struggling against the pressure on my chest. Panic seized me, pure and absolute. I was trapped, pinned down by an invisible entity. I cried out, a muffled sound lost in the terror. I felt like I was sinking into the floor, being absorbed by the heavy space. Just as I felt I might pass out from the pressure and lack of air. Something shifted. The intense weight didn't vanish instantly, but it lessened, enough for me to draw a ragged breath, enough for my muscles to gain a tiny purchase. With a desperate surge of adrenaline fueled by pure terror, I scrambled away from the corner, crawling, then stumbling, until I was well out of the affected area. The moment I was clear, the pressure vanished entirely. I lay on the floor, panting, trembling, my body aching, as if I had been crushed. The corner looked normal again, empty, but I knew what had just happened. Something invisible, something powerful, had tried to pin me down in that spot. I never go near that corner now. The armchair remains there, but it's just a piece of furniture again, albeit one that sits in a place of terror. The living room is different, tainted by the knowledge of the unseen force that resides there. The weight hasn't returned with that same crushing intensity since that night, but I still feel it sometimes when I'm tired or stressed or just sitting quietly. I feel a fleeting pressure on my shoulders, a subtle heaviness on my chest, or the air in a room will suddenly feel thick and heavy for a moment, triggering a wave of panic. It's a constant reminder of what happened, what I felt. I don't know what the unseen weight is. Is it a lingering presence, tied to the corner, or something that happened there long ago? Is it some kind of physical anomaly that defies current understanding? Or is it something else, something malevolent, that chose that spot as its place and asserts its presence through physical force? I have no answers, but the experience left me permanently marked. I carry the memory of that crushing weight, that struggle against an invisible force, with me always. And I live with the chilling fear that the unseen weight isn't just in that corner anymore. That perhaps by pinning me down that night, it left a part of itself with me, a permanent, invisible burden that I might feel pressing down on me again. Anytime, anywhere. I bought this house about a year ago. It's a charming older place, solid and well built, with a layout that felt traditional and comfortable. I spent the first few months getting to know it, fixing little things, settling in. I walked its perimeter outside, measured rooms inside for furniture, even glanced at a digital copy of its original floor plan out of curiosity. I knew its dimensions, its shape, the placement of its windows and doors. It was a known quantity, a familiar space, which is why the discovery was so profoundly unsettling. It happened while I was finally getting around to rearranging the living room. I wanted to move a large antique bookshelf that had been left by the previous owners. It was incredibly heavy, situated against the longest interior wall. I enlisted a friend to help me, and with considerable effort we managed to slide it away from the wall, revealing the section of wallpaper behind it that hadn't seen light in decades. The wallpaper there was a little faded, but what immediately caught my eye wasn't the discoloration. It was a seam. Not a wallpaper seam, but a faint vertical line running down the middle of the wall section that had been covered by the bookshelf. And near the floor along the baseboard, I saw something else, a subtle break in the wood, and what looked like a small, almost invisible handle or latch, painted over to blend in. My friend didn't seem to notice, already complaining about the weight of the bookshelf, but I was fixated. That wall section felt different. It seemed slightly recessed, maybe an inch or two compared to the rest of the wall. A hidden door. Here, it didn't make sense. There was no corresponding door on the other side of the wall in the dining room. No closet here on the floor plan. Dismissing my friend's complaints for a moment, I knelt down and examined the baseboard. Yes, it was definitely a handle, small and flat, almost flush with the wood. With trembling fingers I grasped it and pulled. There was a faint click, and the section of the wall, seam and all, swung inwards silently, like a hidden door. Behind it was darkness. A gap. My friend finally stopped talking and peered over my shoulder, his eyes widening. Taking a deep breath, I reached inside and fumbled for a light switch. My fingers found one. I flicked it on. A small room was revealed. It was narrow, maybe 6 feet by 10 feet. My first thought was that it was a bizarre, secret closet, but as I stepped inside, my friend following hesitantly, I realized it was much stranger. The walls weren't drywall or plaster like the rest of the house. They were rough-hewn wood, dark and uneven. like the inside of a very old cabin. The floor was packed earth, cool and damp underfoot, not the hardwood of the living room. The air was different too, colder, heavier, and carrying a peculiar smell, not quite musty, more like stagnant water and something else, something subtly metallic and unpleasant. And there were no windows, none at all. My friend voiced my thought. What is this place? It's not on the plans, and it doesn't fit the house. He was right. The house was a standard rectangle from the outside. I had walked around it. There was no way this room fit within its known dimensions without overlapping with another room, or extending beyond the exterior wall. We went back out to the living room, leaving the hidden door open, the strange dark space a jarring contrast to the familiar comfort of my home. I grabbed the digital floor plan on my tablet. I looked at the living room wall where the door was. It was a solid interior wall separating the living room from the dining room. No closet, no recess, no indication of another room existing there. I went outside and walked around the exterior of the house, looking at the section of external wall that should correspond to this hidden room. It was just a flat, uninterrupted stretch of siding between two windows, one in the living room, one in the dining room. There was no way physically that this room could exist within the known structure of my house. It was like stepping into a space that simply wasn't there from the outside. This realization was profoundly disorienting. Terrifying. My house wasn't what I thought it was. Its physical reality seemed flexible, compromised. Who built this room? Why? And how could it exist? My friend, bless him, tried to be practical. Maybe it was bricked up long ago, but even then it should show on the outside, or on old plans. We spent an hour trying to find any evidence of the room's existence from the exterior, or in older records, but there was nothing. The room was, by all accounts, impossible. The conversation quickly turned from curious speculation to nervous silence. The discovery had fundamentally altered the feeling of the house. My friend eventually left, visibly unnerved, telling me maybe I should call a contractor to look at it. Though what a contractor could do about a room that defied physics, I didn't know. Left alone, I found myself drawn back to the hidden door. The darkness within felt like a void, a secret heart of the house. I stepped back inside, armed with my phone's flashlight. The air was still cold and damp. The strange metallic smell seemed stronger. The wooden walls felt rough under my fingertips. The room was empty, save for a thick layer of dust and a few cobwebs. There were no clues as to its purpose, no objects left behind. But as I stood there, shining the light into the corners, I felt a growing sense of unease. The silence felt different from the silence of the rest of the house, deeper, more absolute, and I felt that familiar, unsettling sensation of being watched. Over the next few days, my obsession with the room grew. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I'd open the hidden door, step inside, and just stand there, trying to feel or hear something, trying to understand its impossible nature. The more time I spent in the room, the more I noticed subtle anomalies. The temperature inside the room didn't seem to fluctuate with the house's heating or the outside weather. It remained constant, that same unnatural cold. Sometimes I heard faint sounds, a distant scraping, a low hum, that stopped the moment I stepped out of the room. The air, already heavy, sometimes felt thicker, harder to breathe. The psychological toll was immense. I felt constantly disoriented, questioning the reality of my own home. The house felt like a stranger, a place that hid terrifying secrets within its walls. Was the room just a hidden space, or was it a link to something else? Something that explained its impossible existence. The climax came late one night. I was in the living room near the bookshelf, when I felt a strong pull towards the hidden door. The air in the living room near the wall felt colder than usual, and I heard a faint version of the scraping sound that seemed to emanate from behind the wall. Driven by fear, but also that desperate need to confront the mystery, I slid the bookshelf aside and opened the hidden door. The room was darker than usual, the single light bulb I had installed flickering erratically. The smell of stagnant water was overwhelming, and as I stepped inside, the hidden door slammed shut behind me with a loud, final thud. Panic seized me. I fumbled for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. It was stuck, or locked. I was trapped inside the impossible room. The flickering light cast frantic shadows on the rough wooden walls, making them seem to shift and writhe. And then I saw them, scratched into the rough wood of the wall opposite the entrance, illuminated by the frantic flicker of the bulb, were symbols, crude, disturbing, some resembling distorted figures, others like complex, impossible diagrams. They looked ancient, disturbing, and beneath the symbols, scratched deeper into the wood, were words, a single phrase, repeated over and over. It is a hunger, it waits. My blood ran cold. The silence in the room, save for the flickering light and my own ragged breathing, felt suddenly terrifyingly active. The air grew colder, biting at my exposed skin. I felt the intense, palpable sensation of being watched, not just from the walls, but from the darkness in the corners, from the very air around me. The impossible nature of the room felt like an active threat, a trap that had just sprung, fueled by pure terror. I threw myself against the hidden door, pounding on it, screaming. The wood felt solid, unyielding. The scraping sound, distinct and close now, seemed to come from within the walls of this room, from behind the rough wood. It sounded like something moving just beneath the surface. I don't know how long I was trapped in there. Time seemed to warp and stretch. The flickering light eventually died, plunging me into absolute darkness. The scraping sounds and the feeling of being watched my only companions. I huddled on the damp earth floor, trembling, mind reeling from the impossible room, the horrifying message, the palpable presence. Eventually I heard a click. The hidden door creaked open, letting blessed light from the living room flood in. My friend stood there, looking pale and shaken. He said he had come back to check on me, saw the bookshelf moved, and found the hidden door shut. It had been unlocked when he tried it. I scrambled out of the room, collapsing onto the living room floor, gasping for air. My friend helped me up, asking what happened. I could only gesture weakly towards the hidden room. He looked inside. The light he had turned on in the living room illuminated the space. The rough wooden walls were there, the earth floor, but the symbols and the words, they were gone. The wood was bare. My friend, though unnerved by finding the hidden room and me trapped inside, suggested I must have been hallucinating the symbols and words in the darkness and my panic. But I knew what I had seen. I haven't been back in that room since. I've slid the heavy bookshelf back in front of the hidden door, sealing it off, pretending it doesn't exist. But I know it's there, an impossible space within my home. The house feels different now, tainted. I'm constantly aware of that section of the wall, wondering what lies behind it, wondering what the hunger is, and what it waits for. The physical reality of my home is compromised. It holds a secret, terrifying dimension that defies logic, and I live with the chilling fear that the door might open again on its own, or that something from within that impossible room, that space that exists outside of reality, might find a way to step out. The house is no longer just walls and rooms. It's a place with a terrifying secret, a place where reality is thin, and something waits in the darkness of the room that wasn't there.